Gavin Newsom's face turned completely white when Lauren Boebert placed those bank records on the table. Those documents contained proof that Newsom had diverted $12 billion meant for homeless aid into his own family companies. Non-existent shelter projects, fake invoices, and luxury real estate investments. California's most powerful governor had gotten rich off the suffering of the homeless. What happened in the next 180 seconds would expose the largest humanitarian fraud in state government history and prove that Gavin Newsom had turned California's homeless crisis into his family's personal enrichment scheme, while millions of people lived on the streets. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that's about to shatter everything you thought you knew about California's homeless crisis and government corruption, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. You're about to witness the complete destruction of a political dynasty built on stealing money from the most vulnerable people in America. The packed House Oversight Committee room vibrated with tension on this sweltering July afternoon, the kind of suffocating atmosphere that precedes a massive thunderstorm. What was supposed to be a routine hearing on federal homelessness funding was about to become the most devastating exposure of state-level corruption in congressional history. Sitting at the witness table, 37-year-old Congresswoman Lauren Boebert from Colorado had come armed with evidence that would destroy one of the most powerful political families on the West Coast. Her steel gray blazer was immaculately tailored, her demeanor methodical and precise, but those who knew her recognized the look in her eyes, the same relentless determination of a prosecutor who had spent months building an ironclad case against a criminal organization. Lauren Boebert had spent 22 months conducting what would become the most thorough investigation of government fraud ever undertaken at the state level. Working with FBI financial crimes investigators, former California state auditors, and whistleblowers from inside Newsom's administration, she had assembled evidence that would prove how California's homeless crisis had been systematically exploited for massive personal enrichment. Her team had obtained banking records from offshore accounts, construction contracts for projects that never existed, financial audits that had been suppressed by state authorities, and testimony from contractors who had been forced to participate in fraudulent billing schemes. What they had uncovered was a criminal enterprise that operated at the highest levels of California's state government for over a decade. Across the committee room sat Governor Gavin Newsom, 56 years old and radiating the kind of supreme arrogance that comes from a lifetime of political privilege and media protection. His $8,000 Italian suit was perfectly tailored, his hair styled by Hollywood's most expensive salon, and his demeanor suggested a man who believed himself completely untouchable due to his family connections and political power. Newsom represented the ultimate California political aristocracy, born into wealth, educated at elite institutions, and groomed for power from childhood. From San Francisco mayor to lieutenant governor to governor, he had climbed every rung of the political ladder while building a reputation as a progressive champion who fought for society's most vulnerable populations. She displayed a final comprehensive chart showing the scope of the fraud. $12 billion stolen from homeless programs over 10 years. 47 shell companies created to facilitate the theft. $200 million in luxury purchases funded by stolen homeless money. 0 effective homeless services provided by your criminal enterprise. Boebert looked directly into the cameras for her final statement. Every American needs to understand what we've exposed today. California's governor operated a criminal enterprise that stole money from the most vulnerable people in America while maintaining their suffering to justify continued theft. The final blow was comprehensive and devastating. Gavin Newsom, you didn't just steal money from homeless programs. You deliberately maintained human suffering for profit. You turned California's homeless crisis into your family's business model, while people died on the streets from conditions you could have prevented. Your corruption ends today. As security moved to restore order in the chaotic committee room, one thing was absolutely clear. Lauren Boebert had just exposed the governor of America's largest state as the head of a criminal organization that had stolen billions of dollars meant to help homeless individuals. The fearless woman from Colorado had proven that no political position, no matter how powerful, provides immunity from accountability when someone has the courage to follow the money and expose the truth. Boebert's voice rose with righteous fury. This is Jennifer Chun, a homeless teenager who overdosed because the substance abuse treatment facility she was supposed to enter was never built. The $27.8 million meant for her recovery center is sitting in your offshore accounts. The personal stories continued. This is Michael Torres, a homeless man with mental illness who froze to death because the transitional housing program that was supposed to help him existed only on paper. While he was dying on the streets, you were using his housing money to buy a $12 million mansion in Napa Valley. Boebert then connected Newsom's stolen homeless funding directly to his family's luxury lifestyle. Every dollar you stole from homeless programs can be traced to specific luxury purchases and investments that benefited your family, Governor. The screen showed a timeline connecting stolen funds to luxury purchases. The $15.7 million stolen from San Francisco emergency shelter funding was used to purchase a waterfront estate in Marin County. The $22.3 million stolen from Oakland housing projects was invested in a Napa Valley winery. The $31.2 million stolen from job training programs was used to buy luxury condominiums in San Francisco. She displayed photographs of Newsom's properties alongside the homeless encampments that should have been funded instead. While homeless families lived in tents under freeway overpasses, you were buying $50 million worth of luxury real estate with money meant to house them. While homeless individuals died from treatable conditions, you were investing their health care money in luxury wineries and restaurants. The contrast was devastating. Your family's net worth increased by over $200 million during the same period that California's homeless population tripled. Every homeless death, every person sleeping on the streets, every family living in cars, they're all victims of your greed. Perhaps most shocking was evidence that Newsom had deliberately maintained California's homeless crisis to protect his funding sources. The most diabolical aspect of your fraud, Governor, is that you actively prevented solutions to homelessness because solving the crisis would end your primary source of illegal income. Boebert presented evidence of successful programs that had been shut down. These records show that when pilot programs actually succeeded in reducing homelessness, you cut their funding and transferred resources to your fake contractors. Success was bad for business. She displayed internal communications revealing the strategy. This email from your policy director states, Housing First programs are showing 85% success rates, but threaten our contractor network. Recommend terminating successful programs and expanding funding for traditional shelter-based services that maintain client dependency. The systematic sabotage was documented. You shut down 3 successful housing programs that had reduced homelessness by 60% in their service areas. You blocked federal funding for mental health initiatives that were actually working. You prevented the construction of affordable housing that would have ended homelessness for thousands of families. Newsom made one final desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. These allegations are clearly politically motivated attacks designed to undermine California's leadership on social justice issues. Politically motivated, Boebert's voice cut through the pathetic defense like a scalpel through tissue. Governor, we have your banking records, your shell company documentation, your recorded phone calls admitting to fraud, and evidence of 47 shell companies that stole $12 billion while providing no services. This isn't politics. This is documented criminal theft of humanitarian aid. Boebert's investigation had also uncovered how Newsom had systematically suppressed investigations into his fraud. But the theft was only part of the crime, Governor. These documents show how you used your official powers to cover up the fraud and silence anyone who tried to expose it. The screen displayed internal communications revealing the cover-up. This is an email from your Chief of Staff dated September 15, 2022, discussing how to handle a state audit that discovered massive irregularities in homeless funding. Audit findings are politically damaging. Recommend classifying report as confidential and transferring lead auditor to different department. She clicked to the next document. Here's the response from your budget director. Report suppression approved. Auditor has been reassigned to Parks Department. New audit team will focus on programmatic outcomes rather than financial accountability. You didn't just steal money, Governor. You corrupted the oversight system to protect your crimes. The systematic cover-up was extensive. State Auditor Jennifer Walsh was demoted after discovering that $2.8 billion in homeless funding had no documented outcomes. Investigator Robertson was transferred after questioning why homeless populations increased despite massive spending. Whistleblower Sarah Martinez was fired after reporting that contracted services were never provided. Boebert had saved the most damaging evidence for last, recorded phone conversations that captured Newsom discussing his criminal enterprise. Governor, we also have recorded phone calls where you discuss the systematic theft of homeless funding with your family members and criminal associates. The first recording began playing, and Newsom's voice filled the committee room, discussing his fraud with shocking casualness. The homeless budget is our largest revenue stream. We can invoice for any amount because nobody wants to seem uncompassionate by questioning homeless spending. It's the perfect crime, stealing money while claiming to help people. His family member's voice responded, "What about the auditors? Someone will eventually notice that no services are being provided." Newsom, we control the audit process. Any problematic findings get classified or suppressed. The media won't investigate because they support our homeless advocacy image. As long as we keep talking about compassion and urgency, nobody questions where the money actually goes. The conversation continued with devastating revelations. The beauty of the homeless crisis is that it's self-perpetuating. The worse the problem gets, the more money we can request. We actually want the homeless population to increase because it justifies larger budgets. But the most devastating part of Boebert's presentation focused on the human impact of Newsom's fraud. While your family was stealing billions from homeless programs, Governor, actual homeless individuals were dying on California's streets from lack of services that your fake companies were supposed to provide. The screen showed photographs and documentation from California's homeless encampments. This is Maria Rodriguez, a homeless mother of 3 who died from exposure in a San Francisco encampment. The emergency shelter where she was supposed to receive housing was never built because you stole the $15.7 million meant for construction. Newsom's face was ashen as the human cost of his crimes was displayed. This is Robert Washington, a homeless veteran who died from a treatable medical condition because the mental health services he was promised never existed. The $18.9 million meant for his treatment was diverted to your family's luxury real estate investments. Newsom's response was a masterful display of political deflection, delivered with the practiced sincerity that had made him a national Democratic star. Congresswoman, California faces unique challenges due to our housing costs, weather, and the fact that other states send their homeless populations to us. Despite these challenges, we've made significant investments in innovative programs that are beginning to show results. The answer sounded reasonable and compassionate, exactly what the audience expected to hear from someone who had built his career on progressive social policies. But Boebert had spent months preparing for this moment, and she knew that behind Newsom's humanitarian rhetoric lay a criminal conspiracy that would shock the American people. She reached into her briefcase with calculated precision, retrieving a thick folder marked with bank logos and federal audit seals, and placing it deliberately on the witness table, where every camera could capture it. The gesture seemed routine, but experienced observers immediately sensed that something unprecedented was about to unfold. "Governor Newsom," Boebert said, her voice taking on the methodical tone of a forensic accountant presenting findings, "I'd like to examine some specific financial records that might help explain where California's homeless funding has actually gone. I have here banking documentation and contract records that paint a very different picture of your state's homeless programs." The committee room's large screens flickered to life, displaying official banking documents that would make headlines around the world. The letterhead clearly showed Wells Fargo private banking, along with account numbers, transaction dates, and wire transfer amounts that immediately caught everyone's attention. "These are banking records from Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and J.P. Morgan Chase," Boebert announced, her voice carrying across the now silent committee room with the authority of a federal auditor presenting evidence to Congress. These documents were obtained through a federal financial crimes investigation into the misuse of homeless funding in California. Newsom's confident expression began to crack as he realized what he was looking at. His face went pale, his hands gripped the witness table, and his voice took on a defensive tone that everyone in the room immediately noticed. Congresswoman, I'm not sure what you think those documents show, but California's homeless funding is subject to rigorous oversight and accountability measures. Rigorous oversight, Governor? Boebert interrupted, her voice cutting through Newsom's protest like a forensic spotlight through financial darkness. Let me show you what rigorous oversight looks like when someone actually follows the money trail. She clicked to the first transaction record, and the screen zoomed in to show a wire transfer that would end Newsom's political career. This is a wire transfer dated March 22, 2023, in the amount of $15.7 million from California Homeless Solutions, LLC, to an account listed under Newsom Family Holdings. The memo line reads, Construction Services for Emergency Shelter Project, San Francisco Bay Area. The committee room erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Boebert continued her methodical presentation. The interesting thing about this transfer, Governor, is that California Homeless Solutions, LLC received exactly $15.7 million from California's Homeless Services budget on March 21, 2023, one day before it was transferred to your family's account. But according to San Francisco city records, no emergency shelter project was ever constructed. Newsom's response was a masterful display of political deflection, delivered with a practiced sincerity that had made him a national Democratic star. Congresswoman, California faces unique challenges due to our housing costs, weather, and the fact that other states send their homeless populations to us. Despite these challenges, we've made significant investments in innovative programs that are beginning to show results. The answer sounded reasonable and compassionate, exactly what the audience expected to hear from someone who had built his career on progressive social policies. But Boebert had spent months preparing for this moment, and she knew that behind Newsom's humanitarian rhetoric lay a criminal conspiracy that would shock the American people. She reached into her briefcase with calculated precision, retrieving a thick folder marked with bank logos and federal audit seals, and placing it deliberately on the witness table, where every camera could capture it. The gesture seemed routine, but experienced observers immediately sensed that something unprecedented was about to unfold. Governor Newsom, Boebert said, her voice taking on the methodical tone of a forensic accountant presenting findings, I'd like to examine some specific financial records that might help explain where California's homeless funding has actually gone. I have here banking documentation and contract records that paint a very different picture of your state's homeless programs. The committee room's large screens flickered to life, displaying official banking documents that would make headlines around the world. The letterhead clearly showed Wells Fargo Private Banking, along with account numbers, transaction dates, and wire transfer amounts that immediately caught everyone's attention. These are banking records from Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and J.P. Morgan Chase, Boebert announced, her voice carrying across the now silent committee room with the authority of a federal auditor presenting evidence to Congress. These documents were obtained through a federal financial crimes investigation into the misuse of homeless funding in California. Newsom's confident expression began to crack as he realized what he was looking at. His face went pale, his hands gripped the witness table, and his voice took on a defensive tone that everyone in the room immediately noticed. Congresswoman, I'm not sure what you think those documents show, but California's homeless funding is subject to rigorous oversight and accountability measures. Rigorous oversight, Governor? Boebert interrupted, her voice cutting through Newsom's protest like a forensic spotlight through financial darkness. Let me show you what rigorous oversight looks like when someone actually follows the money trail. She clicked to the first transaction record, and the screen zoomed in to show a wire transfer that would end Newsom's political career. This is a wire transfer dated March 22, 2023, in the amount of $15.7 million from California Homeless Solutions, LLC, to an account listed under Newsom Family Holdings. The memo line reads, Construction Services for Emergency Shelter Project, San Francisco Bay Area. The committee room erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Boebert continued her methodical presentation. The interesting thing about this transfer, Governor, is that California Homeless Solutions, LLC, received exactly $15.7 million from California's Homeless Services budget on March 21, 2023, one day before it was transferred to your family's account. But according to San Francisco city records, no emergency shelter project was ever constructed. The fraudulent contracts were processed through a corrupt procurement system that Newsom controlled through appointed officials who ensured that his shell companies received no-bid contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The contracts included vague performance metrics and minimal oversight requirements that made it virtually impossible to prove that services weren't being provided. The stolen money was then laundered through a complex network of real estate investments, luxury purchases, and offshore accounts that made the fraud appear legitimate on surface inspection. Newsom's family accumulated massive wealth through property acquisitions, business investments, and luxury lifestyle expenditures that were funded entirely by stolen homeless aid money. The most diabolical aspect of the scheme was how Newsom actively prevented effective homeless solutions to maintain the crisis that justified his fraud. Successful programs that actually reduced homelessness were defunded or shut down, while ineffective programs that maintained the status quo received unlimited resources. California's homeless crisis wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate business model. The House Oversight hearing on federal homelessness funding had been scheduled to review the effectiveness of federal programs and discuss coordination with state governments. Newsom had enthusiastically agreed to testify, confident that he could use the platform to request additional federal funding while positioning himself as a national leader on homeless issues. He had no idea that Lauren Boebert had specifically requested to participate in this hearing because she knew it would provide the perfect forum to expose his fraud in front of a national audience while discussing the very programs he had been using to steal billions of dollars. While Newsom prepared his standard presentation about California's innovative approaches to homelessness and the need for increased federal support, Boebert was preparing to present the most comprehensive case of government fraud ever documented in American political history. The committee room was packed with homeless advocates, social service providers, policy experts, and reporters who expected to witness routine discussion of federal funding strategies. Major news networks had assigned their top investigative correspondents to cover what they assumed would be a straightforward hearing about homeless policy coordination. None of them were prepared for what they were about to witness: the complete exposure of the largest government fraud scheme in American history, accomplished through the systematic presentation of banking records, construction contracts, and financial evidence that had been hidden from federal oversight. The hearing began with routine questions about federal-state coordination, program effectiveness, and resource allocation strategies. Newsom delivered passionate responses that emphasized California's leadership on homeless issues and the urgent need for additional federal support. His answers were emotionally compelling and designed to reinforce his reputation as a compassionate leader fighting to help society's most vulnerable populations. Governor Newsom, Boebert began when her questioning period arrived, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held explosive evidence. California has received over $50 billion in federal homelessness funding over the past decade, yet your state's homeless population has tripled during the same period. Can you explain how this funding has been utilized to achieve these outcomes? But behind the carefully crafted image of a humanitarian leader lay a darker truth. For over a decade, Gavin Newsom had operated the most sophisticated government fraud scheme in American history, using California's homeless crisis as cover for stealing billions of dollars, while the state's homeless population exploded to unprecedented levels. He had survived scandals, deflected investigations, and silenced critics through a combination of political connections, media manipulation, and outright intimidation. He thought his crimes were protected by layers of political allies and buried beneath mountains of bureaucratic complexity. He was about to discover otherwise. This confrontation was the culmination of one of the most extensive financial fraud investigations ever conducted outside federal law enforcement channels. Lauren Boebert had begun questioning California's homeless spending patterns 22 months earlier, when state reports showed massive increases in funding alongside corresponding increases in the homeless population. Her staff had started by analyzing California's homeless services budget, which had grown from $2 billion annually in 2010 to over $12 billion by 2023, while the state's homeless population had tripled during the same period. They noticed that billions of dollars were being allocated to contractors with no verifiable track record of homeless services, and that many projects receiving funding seemed to exist only on paper. But the real breakthrough came when a former California state auditor reached out to Boebert's office with evidence that financial audits revealing massive fraud had been systematically suppressed by the governor's office. This auditor, whose identity would remain protected, provided access to suppressed reports, internal communications, and banking records that revealed how homeless funding was being systematically diverted into private accounts. What followed was a painstaking process of tracing money through complex networks of shell companies, reconstructing financial transactions that had been deliberately obscured, and documenting how California's homeless crisis had been weaponized for personal enrichment. Boebert's team had to verify banking records from multiple jurisdictions, analyze construction contracts for projects that never existed, and piece together evidence from dozens of sources who had been intimidated into silence. They discovered that Newsom had created a network of fake contractors, shell companies, and fraudulent service providers that existed solely to steal homeless funding while providing no actual services to homeless individuals. The money was then laundered through real estate investments, luxury purchases, and offshore accounts controlled by the Newsom family. Most shocking of all, they found evidence that Newsom had deliberately blocked effective homeless solutions to maintain the crisis that justified continued massive spending on his fraudulent schemes. California's homeless problem wasn't being solved because solving it would end Newsom's primary source of illegal income. During his rise to power in California politics, Gavin Newsom had perfected a system for monetizing human suffering that was so sophisticated it operated like a legitimate humanitarian organization while functioning as a criminal enterprise. His operation relied on creating the appearance of massive efforts to address homelessness while ensuring that problems persisted to justify continued funding. The scheme worked by establishing networks of shell companies that appeared to be legitimate homeless service providers, but existed solely to receive government contracts and divert the money to Newsom family accounts. These companies would submit proposals for homeless shelters, job training programs, mental health services, and housing construction projects that sounded comprehensive on paper but were never actually implemented.